Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human Arif, who is away from the state of Minnesota and is enjoying his Christmas vacation over in Vermont.
Hooray!
So you're away from the stadium, and this is what happens. You realize the Vikings were undefeated at home.
Yeah, this has to be the reason.
Yes. Well, this is really all of our faults. Like if we're looking
collective fault.
Yeah, if we're looking at this from from a certain Vermont point of view, we're all in this together, right? Like this really is all of our faults. This is
yeah, the collective responsibility ethic of Vermont is playing strong here.
Exactly. That's what happened. It had nothing to do with terrible play calling or making Kirk Cousins into a goddamned wide receiver or something. No, nothing of the sort. So we will be discussing the Monday Night Football game, Packers defeating the Vikings for the first time in US Bank Stadium. But before we do, we do our best to keep the cursing on this show to a minimum, but we will be talking about two very infuriating topics today, including the game itself and probably a little bit into the new Star Wars movie at the very end of the episode, which I think it's safe to say Arif and I have
I have thoughts.
Yeah, we have thoughts is the nicest thing that we can say about it. I was leaving the theater bleeding. So we'll explain that. We'll explain that one later. But so we're going to try to keep the cursing to an absolute minimum, but this was a rough one. This was not a game that went according to plan. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show to help keep the lights on and help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode as well. Just another note to those who donated to the show during the Tree Fitty campaign. I will be sending out packages here in just a day or two. I'm waiting for something I'm waiting for like one more package to be here, and then I can send them out. But most of the stuff has arrived. I just need to send that out here in the next couple of days. So you will be receiving your swag as promised. Though I don't think I'm going to have any CJ Ham stuff in the packages this time. I did a lot of searching for CJ Ham merchandise because I've been pimping him as a player a lot this season, but I just can't seem to find anything that I would want to give away. I found a lot of stuff I want for myself, but I didn't find much I wanted to give away. So. But that'll be sent off here in the next couple of days. So probably likely next week once Christmas and everything kind of settles here. So again, if you're interested in donating to the show, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well. All right. Shilling is over. Wow. This game. I'm not somebody who believes that, if you're 0-8 on Monday Night Football, you're never going to win a game. But you're now 0-8 on Monday night.
0-9 now.
0-9 now, yeah. Maybe you fake a injury a la like Xavier Rhodes or something. Like, I don't know if Sean Mannion gives us a better shot on Monday night, but at this point,
can't seem to give you a worse one. So
no, good Lord. Okay, so the first thing we want to mention is that there were a couple of injuries that came out of this game. Not a lot is known of them as we are recording right now. Anthony Barr went out with what appeared to be a leg injury. Eric Kendricks was I believe it was Eric Kendricks, was complaining about a quad injury. He was walking around on the sidelines and had just, taken off his jersey and his helmet and everything over into the second half. So he at least didn't appear to, need to have his leg amputated or something. But this isn't a good. The Vikings defense was really the only positive shining moment out of this game. So the fact that the Vikings defense is starting to be affected by injuries this close to the playoffs is troubling.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that you can weather maybe one injury at linebacker, and the Vikings actually do have really good depth there. I thought Eric Wilson actually played pretty well today, so that's a good testament to that. But multiple injuries at linebacker, plus obviously Ben Gideon's already out for the season, being on IR with that concussion. You really test the depth. And so they're forced to play Cantrell Brothers. That obviously had a pretty big impact on the game because Eric Kendricks, who recovered 2 fumbles despite missing half the game. Eric Kendricks is maybe the MVP of the defense. Certainly he's the best performing player on the defense. And his presence was pretty necessary. Especially as the Vikings continue to get gashed in the run game as the game went on. So yeah, that was pretty tremendous. Anthony Barr missed the final, I think 7 snaps. It really felt like it was a little bit more than 7. But that's when that second Aaron Jones touchdown happened when Cantrell Brothers was in. And I think that actually played a pretty significant role. Brothers couldn't get off the block or shoot the gap quickly enough. And so, yeah, I mean, if the run game is gashing you, if that's like a thing that's a problem, then it would help to have both starting linebackers, and especially one that had been playing such a central role in the defense.
Well, let's talk about the positives to the game, because the defense really did everything it could to make it so that the offense could work. You'll give them as many opportunities at the ball with turnovers to be able to keep the Packers until the third quarter from scoring a touchdown. Like, this was a Vikings team that was out there swatting balls and was bending but not breaking.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, I don't think the defense committed a penalty either. I think all 3 penalties were offensive. I don't know that for sure, but I know at least 2 of them were offensive, so that's a pretty good sign and a good change from what the defense has been in the past. But importantly, the Packers were 36% on third down. That's a really good mark for a defense to be. They were 1 for 3 in the red zone. Obviously, we remember the one, again, the Aaron Jones touchdown. They allowed 5.1 yards per play. That's, relatively low, especially for an offense that's supposed to have a quarterback that's this talented. 3 sacks for 17 yards, forced 4.6 yards per attempt through the air, and obviously the turnovers, right? They had a bunch of turnovers. 3, because one of those fumbles wasn't recovered by the defense. So 3 turnovers, 1 interception, 2 fumble recoveries, both by Eric Kendricks. And just a really phenomenal interception, by the way, from Anthony Harris. Both safeties played really well in this game, probably better than we've seen them for at least a couple of weeks. Harris is leading the Vikings right now in interceptions, most interceptions by a safety since that guy we don't want to talk about back in 2009. Really incredible performance from him and the safeties in the back end. Better performance from Xavier Rhodes than we're used to seeing. Gave up a couple of short ones. One of the contested ones to Devontae Adams. I thought he was in great position, so I don't want to blame him too much for that. Really tremendous performance from Mackenzie Alexander. Jaron Kearse was in the game for 5 snaps. Pretty good 5 snaps. Even Mike Hughes, who I think, he wasn't really playing well. I think on balance, you'd say that he played all right. I thought Trey Waynes played well. These are the players that I think we were most concerned about heading into the playoffs. Quarterbacks are the most important position on the defense, at least according to kind of the most recent research we have. And that's where the Vikings' biggest weakness was. And that's kind of where the Packers would be able to attack them with Devontae Adams. And though Adams ended up with 13 catches, I think 13 catches, which, that sounds really bad. But so many of them occurred like at the line of scrimmage that it would almost be cheating to count them. So with like 7.3 yards per catch. So I think that's a really good indication that those catches were not super meaningful for the most part. His longest gain was only 18 yards. And so, he had over half of his yards after the catch. So even though like 13 receptions seems bad from a coverage standpoint, for the most part, I thought the defense did a really good job, especially the cornerbacks. And they were a big part of the turnover production. Harrison Smith caused at least one of those fumbles. Obviously, Anthony Harris, grabbed one of the interceptions. And I think Jaron Curse, caused another fumble they did not end up recovering it. Overall, really good job, I think, from the back end and the defense in general. Even though, the defense has been kind of the scapegoat, 23 points doesn't seem like that's like an amazing amount. Like it's a better than average amount, but it's not like an amazing amount to hold a team to. I think 23 points plus remarkable field position for your offense, I think is really, really meaningful, especially because those points seem to come later in the game after the defense was fairly tired and injured. So yeah, I think it's actually kind of fair to say that if we were to take a look at some silver linings, we could take a look at, Daniil Hunter, who had a good game, Linval Joseph, who had a good game, and that secondary, that surprisingly looked really good. Obviously a couple of dud, plays on defense. Like I said, Kentrell Brothers had an opportunity for a tackle, didn't get it. That ended up being a touchdown. Shamar Stephan was moved around in the running game. Everson Griffin, didn't seem to do anything, and was moved a little bit in the run game as well. So not perfect performances from the defense or anything, but I would say on balance, the defense played pretty well.
Yeah, and there were a couple of like really nice plays, a couple of really nice hits, even in the run game, despite the fact that Aaron Jones was able to light up the Vikings for 154 yards rushing. There were a couple of really nice stops and really nice plays. But as you were saying, this was Devontae Adams getting 13 receptions for 116 yards, and a lot of them were just because the Vikings were playing so far off of Devontae Adams. They're like, okay, well, we're just going to get 4 or 5 yards now and do this.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the difference between like good defensive execution, because I think the defense executed its assignments well, and poor defensive design. I think that the design of the defense really allowed, especially those really quick throws. 2nd and 1, I remember Trey Waynes was lined up in off coverage. And a lot of times the Vikings cornerbacks will be playing off coverage because that is what they judge to be the appropriate response in this situation. Zimmer's mentioned a couple of times now that, whether or not a cornerback is playing off or on, sometimes the play call requires them to be one of the two. Sometimes the play call kind of gives them guidance, but they can choose. And sometimes the play call doesn't really have an option, and you just kind of have to determine based off of what you're seeing what the most appropriate response is. So, I think it was Trey Waynes on 2nd and 1 allowed a first down in off coverage. I don't know if that's the fault of Mike Zimmer for calling a coverage that requires that, or if that's the fault of the Trey Waynes, who's had this problem in the past, playing off a little bit too much. Obviously, on 2nd and 1, you're scared about the deep ball. That's, kind of the play caller's dream. I think they mentioned on the broadcast. So you can't just be complacent, but, free first down's a free first down, and you need to be a little bit more capable with stopping that. They ran some slant flats that I think that Xavier Rhodes won, for example, where I thought he got his hand in the right place and just happened to be a completion to Devontae Adams. They were fine taking some of the short stuff after the Vikings took away the deep ball, but they weren't able to cover it. So you end up with a lot of different receivers with a lot of first downs and stuff like that. And a lot of that happens because they were just playing off coverage so much, whether it's because in cover 4 they need their cornerbacks to play deep zones, or in cover 2, you kind of want to bail a little bit faster. I don't know, but not great defensive design. And maybe you have to adjust your opinion on defensive execution if you think that's less on Zimmer or the design of the defense and more on the players making particular decisions to play off coverage.
Yeah, this could have been a much, much better game. But the defense held together for the most part, and then injuries started to happen, and Aaron Rodgers being Aaron Rodgers, you weren't going to be able to keep him from scoring a touchdown. This was especially the way that the first couple drives ended up, where they ended up with 3 points, but it looked like he was constantly threatening to break something off. So the fact that they did end up scoring, it's rough, because you watch the Vikings offense do so many positive things, especially last week against San Diego and in previous games. You're like, okay, the Vikings offense is dangerous. They have a run game. They have a pass game. They can do play action. But man, when the offensive line plays the way that it did tonight, they have no ability to throw the ball or run the ball. All they can do is hope that Kirk Cousins doesn't run 8 yards backwards in order to try to avoid the sack and then just get sacked anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers defense clearly had their eyes set on targeting Garrett Bradbury, who's had a pretty rough year overall. It looked like he'd kind of improved partway through the year. But the last couple of games, it seems like he's been kind of regressing back to where he was at the beginning of his year. And he had another really poor game, gave up 3 sacks to Darius Smith, as well as additional pressures. Riley Reif had a bad game. Even if you get rid of the penalties, he had a pretty bad game. I think the worst one he's had all season. Pat Elflein had a really bad game. Slow off the snap, although that one was probably Garrett Bradbury's fault, the one that was televised. But otherwise, yeah, still slow off the snap, still not able to generate or wall off defenders on the backside of runs and stuff like that. Just a really poor performance from especially those 3. I thought, Brian O'Neill, who I think gave up his first sack of the season per PFF, kind of finally he gave rid of that bugaboo. I think other than that one sack, he actually did a really good job holding down his side of the line. Josh Klein did all right, especially in pass protection. I think he technically gave up a sack too, so it's really kind of the bulk of those 50 other plays that he played that make him look pretty good. But those other 3, Riley Reif, Pat Elflein, Garrett Bradbury, they weren't able to prevent pressure from coming forward. And at the end of the day, that meant Cousins was pressured on, I want to say, 45% of snaps or something wild like that. And we've mentioned in the past, the break-even point for a lot of quarterbacks is around 40%. If you continuously give up pressure on 40% of dropbacks, then your offense just it takes a nosedive. That point is when kind of the inflection is on how quickly pressure can affect an offense's overall production. And at 45%, that's over the course of a year, that's the worst pressure rate that a quarterback can sustain in 16 games. So this was pretty bad. And a lot of that, of course, has to do with how the offensive line was beaten really quickly. A lot of times we talk about pressure rate, in terms of how the quarterback can manage it. And, Cousins did exacerbate a lot of these problems by holding onto the ball, by running backwards, when it was clear that, he was going to get sacked and makes those sacks worse. I think the prime example of that is when Riley Reif got beat right away off the snap, and by Darius Smith, who, clubbed his elbow inside, starts running at Cousins, and instead of stepping up into the pocket, which Cousins does have the room and the ability to, he steps back and back and back, and then instead of throwing it away like he does later in the game, he holds onto the ball, and that ends up being a sack. So, really, really poor offensive line play, especially in pass protection, but I think it was exacerbated by the way Cousins responds to pressure generally. You would have expected a little bit more from how much protection Cousins has been getting all year, whether by design or the offensive line or whatever, and we just didn't see it here.
So I have to ask, what was more frustrating for you to watch as a fan, as an analyst? Was it the random 4th down going for it after trying to turn Kirk Cousins into a receiver? Or was it I'm really trying not to be just cursing a blue streak right now. The whatever the hell you call that 2-minute offense that just looked miserable. Like which is more frustrating?
With a 2-minute offense where you run the ball in the first 2 downs, there is at least a chance that, you break off a big run and score a touchdown. With Kirk Cousins as a wide receiver play, I mean, that was like he was wide open. You could have gotten for 20 yards, maybe a touchdown. Diggs just overthrew him or whatever.
And Diggs could have got a first down on that and not.
Yeah, and he could have scrambled on his own, right? So there's a chance on that play. It wasn't necessarily a bad play call, although maybe keep that one in your pocket next time. But there's no chance for you to do anything on the hard count when you call a timeout right away and then the punt team comes on, even though there was 13 seconds left on the clock. And great, you gained like 20 yards of field position. Like, I mean, it was awful all around. I thought that one was maybe the most egregious, but there was a lot. I think that kind of, sticking to the run down 2 scores or whatever is obscene. It doesn't make any sense. And I think there was just a little bit too much worry that, the Vikings wouldn't be able to kind of move the ball through the air, which of course they couldn't. But it's not as if in a 2-minute situation that run is going to save you very much. So, yeah, I just kind of baffling play selection and play calling. I think just a really poor understanding of how to manage a clock just generally. That a lot of that's just on Zimmer himself. It's been a problem for him in the past, but I didn't really think it would be such a big problem to this degree. It's so frustrating. It didn't make any sense, and I have no idea what's behind it. Hopefully, we're recording this as the pressers are happening because, we want to get a quicker reaction right away while I'm on the road. But, hopefully someone in the pressers got a really good answer to this question, because that's so bizarre. It makes no sense. It's not even like they needed to get into the right play. The right play apparently is a punt, right? Like they didn't have a reason to do that.
No, and there were so many baffling plays by this offense that after a while, I just, you've watched enough of Kirk Cousins where you know who he is. You know what he's capable of. And after a while, it just seemed like they had completely forgotten that his bread and butter is play action. Like, what are you doing? I remember after a third and it was like a second and 24, you watch him go back and he's just getting eaten up. Like, he needs the distraction. And maybe it's part on the whole, no one's going to believe that they're going to be running with Boone on that play, then fine. But they really missed effective play action, which is also to say he got his first interception off of a play action pass as well.
Yeah, we actually saw this a little bit also in week 2, which, that doesn't lend you a ton of confidence because the Vikings weren't great in week 2, either throwing the ball. But the Vikings abandoned play action in this game, I think in part just because the Packers, especially, and this is what happened the last time they played, the Packers just kind of abandoned the run. They just kind of bit towards the quarterback on play action. They didn't bite on what was happening with the run. They just kind of let the run develop, which, when Mike Boone is the one running the ball, I guess it's a little bit easier to just do that and not have to worry. But more importantly, they did that when Dalvin Cook was gashing them for 7 yards a carry. And so they would, the end man on the line of scrimmage, if they're on the back end of a run action, they would just gut towards the quarterback. They would make sure that they'd be able to put pressure on the quarterback. So in week 2, Cousins lost over 3 yards an attempt on play action. And in week 16, he lost 1.5 yards an attempt on play action. His passer rating on play action in this game, 8.3. That's the passer rating, not the yards per attempt. And that's obviously he throws his interception. I think his first interception of the season, like you mentioned, on play action. On non-play action, it didn't look great. 4.2 yards per attempt, in this week. So it's not like it's better, but at least he doesn't throw the pick. He throws the touchdown. He has more yards per attempt. It was better for him to be not in play action in this game and also in the other Packers game. And so I think the Packers are just doing something where they just don't bite on play action. And I think this might tell us something kind of about the broader issues regarding, a reliance on play action. So it's not as if you can't win, right? The Eagles won in 2017 with a play action heavy offense. But I think when you go up against a defense that just kind of has the answers, I think the Rams against the Patriots is a really good example. And obviously what the Packers are doing to the Vikings, you need to have something else to rely on. And I think they're not calling play action because the Packers are playing it really well. We've had 2 games where the Packers just don't care about the run and they just try to stop play action, and it works really well for them. It also helps that the interior offensive line can't protect, and play action tends to be a longer developing play. But they're not biting. And the same thing happened with the Patriots against the Rams. They didn't bite. So yeah, they didn't call play action. I think it's because it just wasn't working. And I kind of get it, but that means the Vikings need to have another answer. And if they're kind of a play action reliant team, almost to the point where it's a crutch, then they can't win the playoffs either way. I just wish they had more answers or more in their playbook that wasn't, play action, because that's what they needed. Obviously, they needed to find a way to go downfield without putting Kirk Cousins without protection rolling out to his right or left.
And the other problem is that, being a Vikings fan this year has made you really appreciate a fine screen pass. We've become aficionados. We can smell it out right before it's going to happen. We can sniff it out, but the Packers were too. And the Packers were able to stop a lot of these screenplays. And if you were taking away play action and you're taking away the screen pass, and Rudolph didn't seem to be very involved with the pass game at all until it was too late, and your running back's not able to, make any sort of headway, you're stuck, and you end up with the number of first downs that we did.
Yeah, which I counted it up. I guess it was 7. Great. So on throws behind the line of scrimmage, the Vikings averaged 1 yard per attempt. So they had 4 total passes, 4 total yards, one of them for -1 yards on passes behind the line of scrimmage. So the Packers obviously were very good at kind of figuring out what the tell was for it to be a screen pass. And like you said, the Vikings didn't really have a ton of standard downs. So they ended up throwing the ball deep 7 times that game. They ended up with 49 yards, so 7 yards per attempt, which is not awful, but for a deep throw, you expect a little bit better. But importantly, 1 interception, that was to Kevin King. And while I do think that one probably should have been called pass interference, and I don't think like the Adam Thielen one from earlier in the game should have been, the accuracy just kind of wasn't there. And when the accuracy was there, the receivers couldn't haul it in. Like, again, the Adam Thielen one's a pretty good example. It was, there was 1 throw intermediate. 1. It was incomplete. And so you ended up with just this very bizarre looking offense where you don't have play action. The Vikings are not used to kind of standard drop back passing. And when they did standard drop back passing, it was either really deep or pretty short. They didn't really threaten the intermediate of the field very much, which was just so odd. They didn't average well anywhere. The most they got was, short middle of the field, 4.8 yards an attempt. That's not beautiful or anything like that. That's not good. But I really think that they should have probably, tried those intermediate routes, like the corner routes and the dig routes and so on. And they didn't do it. And so you don't have play action. You don't have the screen game, like you said, averaging 4 yards or 1 yard an attempt on screens. And you don't have a standard drop back passing game other than those kind of deep shots. And so you're kind of ceding a lot of strategic ground to the defense if the defense is very familiar with how your offense operates, which obviously the Packers are.
Just not the best game for the offense, whether it was the offensive line or anything. Do you feel like this is a different game with Dalvin Cook starting?
Yeah, I think so. I don't love the idea of attributing very much to a running back. But, I think the difference is clear. I mean, Mike Boone's hesitating at the hole. He doesn't really kind of read the play as quickly as he needs to. And at some point, the running backs don't matter movement. A lot of that's predicated on kind of what happens when the lead back goes down, what the replacement back does. And at some point, there's going to be a replacement level back or a replacement back that is just not going to be able to produce, which is why they're 3rd, 4th, 5th on the depth chart. And I think Mike Boone in this game was a pretty good example why. We saw a big distinction at the very bottom levels of professional football in the AAF between really high level and really low level running backs, which is not to say, that Mike Boone is an AAF running back, but more that there's one point where the talent differential does matter with running backs. You just don't happen to see it very often. And this is a really good example of that. Now, maybe Mike Boone just had a bad day. Maybe he's actually a pretty talented running back, but in this case, it really feels like you were unlikely to have a bad day with Dalvin Cook if he was healthy. Dalvin Cook, one of the most elusive backs in the NFL, breaks a ton of tackles, one of the league leaders in broken tackles, has a bunch of yards after contact, one of the league leaders in that. and makes an offensive line that just doesn't really run block very well look like it does, because he also avoids yards before contact too. So you enter a situation where you've got a running back that generally doesn't overcome his offensive line to produce. And that's exactly what happened. The offensive line blocked poorly. Boone didn't have kind of the decisiveness to overcome, some of the problems that are associated with that, and then just didn't have the inherent running back ability to overcome some of these other problems. So, maybe Mike Boone is a valuable back, but in this context, he just really wasn't. Either he was having a bad day, or the scheme's not really a good fit for him, or this or that or this or that. Maybe the offensive line is just not as good as it seems to be when Dalvin Cook is in. But I feel like if Dalvin Cook is in, at the very least, some of these third downs are third and short, right? Because they're running a bunch on 1st and 10, which I don't know that I would do if you're back to your backup running back. But Dalvin Cook's in there, you're running it hopefully as often, not necessarily more often, as often as you would have in this game. I think you get a lot more favorable third downs that you can convert. Maybe instead of punting on like 4th and 8 or whatever, you're thinking about going for it on 4th and 1, because your running game is that much better that now you're in a situation where it's a short yardage. I think it is a different game with Dalvin Cook in, which is not a difficult thing for me to admit, but just kind of like sometimes you just have to concede that like a running back is talented enough to have this big of an impact on a game. I don't know that the Vikings necessarily win or anything like that, but the offense probably looks a lot less anemic. Maybe they turn one of those turnover field goals into a touchdown, which, 4 points, that's not bad.
No, it definitely would have been appreciated if nothing else. And let's not take away from what was a very fine pass by Kirk Cousins to Stephon Diggs, who made the defender just look silly.
Oh, yeah. Cousins had a couple of them, but I think obviously the touchdown to Diggs was it was phenomenal. Great pass, excellent catch. I saw a couple people talk about, Diggs showing late hands, which I don't know that that's the area I would use to describe that technique. So this has come up a couple of times, especially in Vikings media, but late hands is the concept, and I think Randy Moss was the one who kind of popularized it for Vikings media, is the concept that you don't throw your hands up until the very last moment, because that way the defensive back is not going to know to contest the ball until it's too late. There are no cues for the defensive back to react to, and so you've got your hands up right away. The ball is there. Now you can tuck it back in, and so on, which is fine. He did throw his hands up late, but he also kind of slowed down and turned towards the ball and stuff like that. And so I don't think late hands, because that's all an indication of the defensive back. I don't think late hands is a good example to use here. I think instead it's just really remarkable concentration, really from Diggs, really fantastic accuracy on the entire trajectory with Kirk Cousins, and a lot of trust between Diggs and Cousins. So all of it's good, right? I don't want to diminish Diggs's play on that play based off of what I think is kind of not a misunderstanding, but a misapplication of a football technique. But yeah, he had a couple of good throws. One of his good throws was to Adam Thielen that was dropped. Another one to BC Johnson called back because of a holding penalty and Riley Reif. He had a couple of good throws in there. That doesn't mean he played well. He didn't. But he had a couple of good throws in there, and he deserves some credit for that. But mostly, he played kind of soft. Like we mentioned, a ton of screen passes, a lot of short passes, getting rid of the ball quickly before pressure arrives. Obviously, pressure impacted his play a lot, and you can't excuse that, and that's not necessarily completely on him, but it really felt like he was managing the pocket really poorly in this game in a way that he really hadn't since week 4 this year. And generally, we just didn't see this year. He was just not doing a good job, managing, and a lot of it was interior pressure, so maybe that was the reason, but dealing with all of the pressure in that pocket. He had a bunch of good throws, but overall, I would say he played really, really poorly, and I think pocket management's a big part of it, and, decision making, and he had receivers kind of open a little bit further downfield, and would decide to decline them in favor of CJ Ham or Kyle Rudolph or whatever.
And unlike, previous games, he wasn't able to get away with it there.
Right, yeah. Ham didn't jettison a tackler to get an additional 59 yards after contact or anything like that.
God, when that doesn't fall our way, then you might as well just write the game off as lost. I did see, we're not going into the mailbag right now, but I did see a question a little bit ago that I am going to ask without crediting the person because I can't remember who wrote it. Do you think the Vikings win this game if we get the turnovers up to 7? I feel like 7's the magic number.
If you get to 7, I think you've got a puncher's chance. You're your lotto ticket, right? Mm-hmm. I think you get to 7, you might win. Yeah.
Even scoring what we did on offense? Damn. Well, I mean, if you get seven turnovers, you might get a pick 6 out of that, or recover something for a touchdown. Just throwing that out there as a possibility.
Well, yeah, if you get 7, you probably have at least 21 points, right? You probably at least turn them all into field goals, hopefully.
Well, you would hope, but right. This offense,
so 21 points. That's not bad. Wouldn't have done it all by itself because the Packers scored 23, but maybe you hope the offense on one of its drives gets to kick a field goal or turn one of those field goals into touchdowns. Yeah, I think it's likely that the Vikings win in a 7 turnover environment for them.
Yeah, maybe this is just a game that we can only win when we're at home in Los Angeles. So I mean,
right? In the most comfortable environment that could be in.
Yeah,
a soccer stadium.
Well, I mean.
Right, yeah.
Throwing that out there, it's not like the Chargers are really using it for anything. So, boy, that wasn't fun. That was the opposite of fun. That was not the...
Yeah, and the more we talk about it, the more it really feels like this is... Yeah, there's a bunch of error in offensive execution, especially along the offensive line, but it really just does feel like a coaching failure. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the game management in the final 2 minutes of the half where you're kind of running the ball out, you end up kicking the ball back to the Packers who score. That's just absurd to me that they even let that happen. Or the game management that occurred at the end of the game, where you punt on, I understand it's like 4th and 24. You just kind of always punt instinctively, but like you might not get the ball back. Like try to convert it. And if you don't convert it, it's like you punted poorly anyway, right? Like they're already kind of deep in their own side of the field, so long as like somebody catches it, right? So, I mean, that was like baffling. The fact that the Vikings just don't have a plan for what if they take play action away. So that's not like a game management coaching problem. That's like a season management problem. Like if you just don't have an answer to they take away our bread and butter. Well, I mean, I think Stefanski's like a really great coach. The fact that Cousins, I think, is like the 5th best quarterback in adjusted net yards per attempt and like 2nd best in expected points. I think he's kind of punching above his weight class. And I think a lot of that has to do with Stefanski. I think he's really good, but that bugs me that you just don't have an answer to, all right, they took away, our 2 things. Now what? Especially because they did it the last time you played them. So, it really just does feel like a coaching failure in a lot of ways. And again, the injuries, they played a role. But I mean, the Vikings have their starting quarterback. They've got almost everybody on defense healthy. There's only so many places that excuse can go.
Well, yeah. Let's go to the mailbag, and we're still going to be talking about the game. I put out a mailbag tweet at the 2-minute warning because this game was clearly over. So let's go to... Let's go to the mailbag. I did want to quote the tweet from Bob Marks, who said, quote, "The Packers have dominated this game besides the 3 turnovers," which was excellent analysis by Booger McFarland.
Great, I love it. That's
it. The first question I'm going to read out is from Thomas Kane, who asks, "Do other fan bases suffer as much as we do? If you are not
Ooh.
I am friends with a Lions fan, and let me tell you."
So we have, me and some members of Lions Twitter have had kind of this back and forth discussion about what is worse, getting your hopes up and then getting kicked in the teeth, or just never having hope, and just watching miserable football, day in, day out. Cause, getting your hopes up, at least that involves some good football along the way. So I get it, but I really think it's the emotional roller coaster that's worse. I think it rags on you. Like, what's worse, being Sisyphus or Tantalus, I think is the way I put it. And for those unfamiliar, which if you're not a nerd, that should be most of you. Stop reading books, you idiots. Sisyphus, I think more people are familiar with this, rolls the rock up the hill, and when it gets close, it just kind of falls down. So a Sisyphean task is one that's hopeless, right? Tantalus was where we get the word tantalize from, was punished, I think, for tricking, no, that was Sisyphus, was punished for whatever reason, by Hades, where he would be eternally hungry and thirsty, and water would be just below his lip, and every time he tried to drink water, it would decrease in its level, and there would be like figs or whatever it is Greek people ate just out of reach for him, and every time he reached for it, the branch would move away, and so that's Tantalus. I think that's the worst torture than rolling that boulder up the hill all the time, which, I mean, that sucks too, don't get me wrong, I don't want either of that, but I think it's worse to be Tantalus. I think it's worse to be a Vikings fan.
Unlock the stone of shame. Attach the stone of triumph. Ugh. Yeah, that's still ugly. All right. Let's go to the next question, which is from Wes Myers, who asks, is Za'Darius Smith that good, or did the Vikings highlight his positive aspects? I don't remember hearing his name much this year, but I don't really watch Packers games very often.
Yeah, more power to you, I guess.
It's probably a positive life decision.
Yeah, he's that goodish. I think he's like a top 5 grade on PFF among all edge rushers. He has 50 quarterback hurries this year, I think, including this game. I think he's got the second or third most plays involved in a sack, which kind of strips away, whether or not it's a half sack or a full sack. I think he leads the league in quarterback hits, or he's second. So yeah, like, he is really good. Nobody is so good that they get 3 sacks in a game where the other player isn't also playing poorly, right? Like, JJ Watt would have these games where you get like 4 sacks and you're like, wow, JJ Watt is so good. Which is true. That's obviously the case. Like, during one of his 20 sack seasons, you can't get there without having some level of talent. But also, like, the other guy was bad. And so that, like, clearly plays a role. So yeah, Za'Darius Smith is that good. I think if you take a look at PFF weighted grade, which are the grades that are public, he's a top tier edge rusher, top 5, and I think he might be the top 2 in the NFC. So yeah, he's that good, but like, that's not, like, that doesn't, I'm not saying you're looking for absolution or anything like that. But that his production tonight was not a product just of him being good.
No. Next question is from Stephen Smith, who asks, what's something happy you can tell us to distract us from our lifelong sadness?
Dogs exist, man. That's wild. Rashad has a dog, so I'm just spending a lot of time with the dog, and I normally don't because I don't have one at home. That dog is the most adorable thing, man. It loves Rashad. It loves Rashad too much. It has like a separation anxiety, but aside from that,
is it a small shake and pee dog, or is it a bigger dog?
Oh, it's tiny.
Yeah, that seemed. I just, not that I'm stereotyping your brother. I'm because I do know him, but I'm just trying to envision a scenario where Arshad doesn't have like a purse dog.
Right. Yeah. No. That's exactly what it is. But yeah, I know dogs are pretty cool. If you've got a pet, say hi. That's gotta feel better than watching this game. Mm-hmm. Dogs are, they just love humans, man. We like bred them to do that, and they were like, yeah, all right, just give us some food.
We'll take it.
That's wild, man. I was hanging out with the dog all game. I was probably in a better mood than most of you.
Yeah. Well, speaking as somebody who is deathly allergic to nearly all pets.
Ooh. Didn't you have a dog? I feel like I remember you all having a dog.
Oh, we did. and I couldn't touch it or be in the same room as it for a really long time.
Oh boy.
Yeah, we did have a dog when we were growing up. We also had a cat when we were growing up, and we kept trying to figure out why I had asthma. And as it turned out, something was related. And which was fantastic. I forget if I told the story about the whole being people who are allergic are more allergic to, or people who are allergic to cats are more allergic to male cats because of the way they sweat is actually what you're really allergic to if you're allergic to cats. And and me too. Oh yeah, well I can't go home. I can't go back to my parents' house or anything because nope, they decided to pick up a male cat in the last couple of weeks. So your marriage fell apart. Nope, you're gonna have to get a 1-bedroom. Sorry, son. There's no saving money here. Your mom wanted another cat. I love my parents. I should edit that out, but I'm still keeping it in because it's funny. Positive thing I can tell you to distract you from our lifelong sadness. Baby Yoda memes exist, and that is what shows us that the world loves love. Is baby Yoda exists. That's all I've got.
That's pretty good. I love Baby Yoda.
Yeah, Baby Yoda's good, and the season of The Watchmen was fantastic. So I gotta
watch that. My brother was calling that like the best television ever, and he doesn't really bring himself to that kind of exaggeration.
It was so good. And it was made by the people who did The Leftovers, and I really enjoyed The Leftovers and was happy to just I was happy to watch something that didn't make me horribly depressed, like The Leftovers was wont to do. So no, seriously, every time you took it, you're like, oh my god, did I just take like three Xanax or something? Like why am I crying in the corner right now? Am I on Chantix? What's going on?
A discussion about why life can be good and beautiful despite the Vikings' loss. So yeah. Good job.
So ignore The Leftovers and instead go and hit the Trent Reznor fueled soundtrack of The Watchmen. Quite good. Let's go to the next question, which is from Kyle Slaby, who asks, are the Vikings gunning for an ultimate revenge tour? And thought the most fitting matchup was the Saints in the wild card round.
Probably not. I would argue it's unlikely that the Vikings were like, if we throw this, we get the Saints. That's what we want. Let's go. Nobody wants to play Teddy Bridgewater in the playoffs, man.
Nobody. Absolutely nobody. 100% no. Which is also to say that we forgot to mention at the top of the show that the Vikings are in fact, have in fact clinched a playoff spot. Yay! It's now officially the 6th seed, but I mean, it's the playoffs. Meaningful football in January. I was going to say
the Raiders were 6th seed, the Giants were a 6th seed.
Yeah.
That could happen.
I was going to say meaningful football in January like your Dukes, but the Dukes are playing in December, so
it's a quirk of FCS scheduling where they play the playoffs right after the season. I don't really understand it.
Yeah, it's odd. Next question. Oh, it was Kyle Slaby who asked about the 7 turnovers, so just want to credit him, I suppose. Purple Vole asks, at this point, is there anyone who argues with the narrative that Cousins can't handle the, quote, big moment? Offensive line was awful, but tonight was just another example of how he can't succeed unless he is placed in the perfect environment.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, he played poorly because he played poorly, right? Like, the Bears game wasn't in prime time, right? That was like a 4:00 game, if I remember correctly. The previous Vikings-Packers game, I think, was prime time, though. But I mean, I don't know. He just played poorly against a good team. That has been a pattern for him. He has bucked that trend, I would argue, this year, although those teams turned out not to be as good as we thought. But, I mean, you tend to play good teams in primetime. That's not a guarantee, but you tend to play good teams in primetime. So there's that. And then also, like, what's so special about, like, Monday Night Football that's different from Sunday Night Football? Because now he's won in Sunday Night Football. He knows how to win in Sunday Night Football. Is he secretly Garfield? Does he just hate Mondays? Like, I don't understand, like, why. Secretly
Garfield, huh?
Yeah, that's the new take. Kirk Cousins, secretly Garfield.
I don't even. I just know what the name of the episode is going to be for this one. So, all right. Moving on. That's fantastic and terrible. It is fan-terrible. Awesome. Fan-terrible. Duke's Code asks, no questions, just a reminder that JMU will get their revenge this weekend over the overhyped Bison. Actually, I don't think it's this weekend. I think it's next. But your Dukes were successful in their taking down of an inferior playoff team, and the Bison were able to win their game. I say easy. Yeah, they just waltzed through. They were able to take it fine. But the Bison will play the Dukes, and you and Eric apparently have a bit of a wager.
Oh yeah, so actually I'm kind of unclear about the wager because you just popped in and said wager, and we were both like yes. It involves the shirts. I assume. So there's like these two just horrendously ugly shirts, one representing each team. Mm-hmm. I assume like one of us has to wear the opposing team's shirt. Wearing our own shirt would also be punishment. So like, it's not like it's not remarkably clear, but I would much prefer to wear the James Madison shirt. So I assume the wager is the other shirt.
They were both atrocious. I was looking for as ugly a JMU shirt as I could possibly have found.
It was
successful.
Beautiful. It was incredible. The founding father would have been blinded. What technology produces these colors?
Why is that? Is that tie-dye? Why do I know what that is? I'm confused. Am I a Terminator? Wait, why do I know what that is? All I know is I can spit rhymes about Hamilton now. All of a sudden, I don't know.
Let's put those shirts in the show notes so people know what we're looking at.
God, they were special. I will give you that. Next question is going to be from Carson Schubert. We remember Shuby, our intern. He asks, "Is there any hope?"
Like broadly, no. Like for like the planet, absolutely not. Everyone knows my thoughts on that. For the Vikings, yeah, I mean, sure. The linebackers will probably be healthy when the playoffs start. Maybe Dalvin Cook will be too. Thielen, who I hear started this week. There's a rumor that he was on the field. Yeah, he should be fully ready to go by the time the playoffs start. Yeah, there's hope. This team is more likely to get healthier than some of the teams they play that are more likely to get less healthy. Which sounds weird, but I mean, like the Cowboys just lost, for example, Xavier Su'a-Filo, who was replacing Connor Williams, and they also lost someone else. That was they lost Leighton Vander Esch and Sean Lee, I think, or they always lose Sean Lee, whatever. Just as an example. So yeah, there's hope for the Vikings, which is the insidious part of it all. The planet, absolutely not.
And the Seahawks, let's talk about your other favorite team for just a moment if we're going to be talking about health. That is a team that is now decimated at the wide receiver, or not the wide receiver position, the running back position, to the point where they are apparently bringing back Marshawn Lynch for a game.
Beast mode. there's like a bunch of people in Seahawks Twitter, of which I'm not a part, that are just like, yeah, I don't care if he's any good. This is awesome news.
Like, I don't care if he averages 1 yard a carry or if he averages negative 2 yards a carry. This just needs to happen.
Right, exactly. Which is not the relationship Vikings fans have with Adrian Peterson.
No. Let us be clear. No, that is not the relationship that we have with Adrian Peterson. Adrian was a fine running back and a terrible human being.
And like the fumbling didn't help.
No, the fumbling really didn't, because you can overlook the one, but you can't overlook both.
Right, it's one or the other.
Wow, that's how
it works, James. I'm sorry. That's why there's no hope for the planet. It ties back to the previous question.
I've watched too much of Silicon Valley recently, so I'm just concerned about the robot uprising at this point. The Purple Perp asks, should we just rest our starters through the playoffs in preparation for next season?
Through the playoffs. Maybe I wouldn't go that far. Probably play them, but I like where your head's at.
That is thinking outside of the box. I will admit that. That is pretty good. I'm saving that question because we're going to end with that. Which do you think is the more important draft pick for the first round this year? And we have to assume that the Vikings are going to be somewhere between the middle of the pack to the last third of the first round. Do you believe something like this goes to O-line, or do you believe this goes to corner?
That's interesting. So my current presumption, and it's a very soft one, I'm open to be convinced otherwise, is that the Vikings let go of Xavier Rhodes. They'll actually find a way to keep Trey Waynes, and then obviously re-sign Mackenzie Alexander and Anthony Harris. I think that's the priority over Trey Waynes. But yeah, so they do those those three re-signings. Obviously, they keep Mike Hughes. And if that's the case, I would probably wait until the second round for a cornerback and get that offensive lineman right away. I say this knowing full well that like the math on this is just awful. That even a replacement cornerback is probably better to get an upgrade at than at starting offensive lineman, just because of the massive difference in how important they are. But that just doesn't sit right with me, that kind of conclusion. I think that you need to replace the left guard position at the very least. Whether it's by drafting left tackle and moving Reef inside, or drafting left guard outright, or whatever. I think probably the offensive line is the one you want to hit in round 1, and then cornerback in round 2. Obviously, this all goes out the window if the Vikings are like, yeah, I really love this quarterback. That just makes things interesting. So obviously that's ideal.
Next question from New York Vikes fan. Would you rather watch the movie Cats or this game?
Cats. It's a disaster. Like half the film reels that went out, I guess, were just like unfinished. Mm-hmm. So like one cat for a couple of scenes doesn't even have fur. That's amazing.
Judi Dench, I think it was Judi Dench at one point didn't have like paws over her hands, so you could see her like watching rings and everything.
Yeah, that's right. The only issue is that they started like sending out like the corrected reels. Come on, man. No one was expecting a good movie. Just let it happen. Like I got I acquired, through perhaps less than preferred means, the early release, the pre-post-production release, if you want to call it that, of X-Men Origins Wolverine. Because that got leaked before the movie was actually even released in theaters. And let me tell you, that was a trip. That made that movie way better. Where like they didn't have special effects for like half the scenes. It was incredible.
Wait,
So yeah, definitely cats.
I was going to say, wait, did that have, I forget, was that the movie where Deadpool didn't have a mouth?
Yeah, that's where they made the Merc with a mouth, which I think is it's his nickname, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Merc with a mouth. It didn't have a mouth.
I was going to say, I'm trying to envision that without CG on it. It's like, oh, it's just Ryan Reynolds with duct tape on his mouth.
That part was CG'd. I'll say that. But I think in the plot of the movie, he just gets like all the mutant powers. That's like one of the things. Mm-hmm. So the Cyclops laser beam eyes, that was placeholder CG. So they just had a laser beam that was like not. It was like a high school, my first video editing project. Like it was not. It was like a stock laser beam they just put on there. Mm-hmm. They didn't scrub any of the wires for a ton of scenes. For some scenes that are CG, they only have like the gray puppets. It's great.
That is.
In fact, actually, I think Dan Olsen just did a video on the Snyder Cut and why it's never going to be released for like Justice League or whatever, because the Snyder Cut's never going to go through those revisions that cost like $30 million to do. So if you release the Snyder Cut, you would get basically X-Men Origins Wolverine, the leaked version, and he's actually got some scenes in that video of what in that leaked version. So, yeah.
Don from Ohio asks, why does Zimmer struggle with playoff caliber teams the last 2 years?
Because the playoff caliber teams are good? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, he didn't struggle against the Cowboys or the Eagles, and they're clearly going to the playoffs, one of them. if that counts. The Vikings had like a pretty remarkably weak schedule this year, so they didn't have a ton of opportunities to test themselves against playoff teams. Obviously, the Seahawks are one, the Packers are another, so going 0-3 against those two teams, that kind of sucks. Last year, I mean, they were a 7-9-1 team, so I presume that they didn't win against their playoff opponents, but I have a really remarkably poor memory for these things. But yeah, they lost to the Rams. I remember that. Yeah, they beat the Eagles. I don't know if the Eagles made the playoffs last year. I'm going to assume no. I don't know. But yeah, they lost to the Saints last year. Wow, that's rough. They beat the Packers last year. I thought that was a great Packers team. Lost to the Seahawks. Yeah, I don't know. The playoff teams are good.
Cowboys were in the playoffs last year for the
Eagles,
East.
Huh?
Hold on.
Dang.
Let me check the wild card just because I'm curious. The wild card teams the Eagles did make the playoffs last year. The Eagles won the squeaker against the Bears.
So yeah, the worst NFC playoff team they seem to beat pretty consistently. Yeah, other than that, yeah, I don't know. They're good. Some of it I think is variance, like, one score games and stuff like that. Last year against the Saints, that was just clock management. Like, I don't think it was like they were like super outmatched by the Saints. They just should have hurried up when they had the ball with like 7:30 left and 3 possessions down. But yeah, they do all right against some of them. They went 1-0-1 against the Packers. So it's not always the case. They got decimated by the Patriots and then the Seahawks in consecutive weeks, though. So it definitely feels like the case.
Captain Carrot asks, are the Vikings the worst good team in the league or the best bad team?
Definitely worst good team. I think, yeah, best bad team would be like the Cowboys, actually. And there's a clear separation there, so.
And it's amazing to think that the Cowboys are still leading in like certain offensive categories, despite just how terrible their offense has been put together the last few weeks.
Yeah, like benching Amari Cooper for godforsaken reasons.
For reasons.
Yeah, different depending on who you ask. So clearly they've got a handle on it. Yeah. I think it's pretty good evidence that they're the worst good team. Because, I mean, they like clobber bad teams. And that's what good teams do. They just can't beat other good teams.
Ugh. All right. Let's go to the next question, which CC Norseman just put in. And he doesn't contribute to the show very often, so I feel like CC Norseman should get his due. How can one player be so bad and never win on one specific day/time, i.e. Cousins on Monday nights? Is it a circadian rhythm thing, or perhaps a dietary issue, or does the player just suck?
Remember, theory 1 is Garfield. Mm-hmm. And until that gets proven wrong, that's the presumption. That's how science works. Look it up. Theory 2, I mean, honestly, it's just like a combination of like variance and like that's, you play good teams then. I don't think it's meaningful that Cousins has this like Monday Night Football record. Like, so he played obviously super poorly in this game. Would you put him as the top 3 reasons that the Vikings lost this game? I don't know if I would. Maybe because like, short field's not scoring, but like, yeah, I don't know. It's just like, I think you look for patterns, right? Like there's like 8 million different splits you can look up, like under center versus shotgun, or, with 3 wide receivers or 2 wide receivers out there, play action, not play action, although that one's been tested. So you don't have to worry about that one that much, or Monday night or prime time or Sunday Night Football or whatever. And eventually you find one that's extreme in some way, even though random variance is going to let you find an extreme kind of statistic somewhere. If you keep looking among all these different splits, like on grass or on turf or, in the Western time zone. And some of these, again, have been tested, so you don't have to worry about it just being a product of variance. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's nothing that indicates that it's like a particularly special one after testing, but it just shows up for a player. And it's kind of like a coin flip either way if it's going to continue. We would be talking about how Cousins is bad in prime time if he had lost that Sunday night game a couple weeks ago. But we're not. We're talking about Monday Night Football. So we can change our like narrative to make it seem meaningful to suit kind of the ever-changing fact environment that it's in. Cousins, for example, has a lot of comeback wins, but he only has one in a Vikings uniform, and that was against Denver. So he had no comeback wins in a Vikings uniform, right? And so you can always kind of like find these statistics. So I think that's part of it, is that you're just kind of searching for statistics that seem like extreme in some way.
Yeah. Okay, I can't find the actual question itself or who asked it, so apologies to the person who did. But I am going to end the discussion on the Vikings game and move it toward the real reason why we're here, which is Arif and I's group therapy session on the new Star Wars movie, which was more disappointing. This game or The Last Jedi? No, sorry, the Rise of this was the Rise of Skywalker.
Right.
Before we answer this question, this is your warning on the Star Wars spoilers.
Yeah, super spoiler warning.
This is a super spoiler warning. If you are interested in seeing this movie, you should turn this off now. Or if you're interested in getting into a Twitter argument with Arif about why you think his opinion is wrong, you should stop listening to this and then watch the movie and then realize Arif is probably right here. Again, this is your last chance before we actually go into talking about the Rise of Skywalker. Arif, go ahead.
So I think it has to be Rise of Skywalker because it's the conclusion. Right? Like the Vikings will play 2 more games. And then after that, they'll have like another season, right? Like it's going to take a lot, I think, and I'm not saying they're not going to do another trilogy. This is obviously a cash cow, but it was the final part of the trilogy of trilogies, right? And I thought there was a lot of potential that had been set up for it. And so I would say that Rise of Skywalker is more disappointing, because like the Vikings, they'll continue. And also, you always kind of, in the back of your mind, you're like, yeah, I don't know about this. Whereas with like the Star Wars, it's like Star Wars, they'll figure it out. I wrote a rant to prepare myself for this episode of the show. And as I continued writing the rant, the more structure kind of emerged in the rant. And also now it's 2,000 words.
So you're looking at trying to publish it at The Athletic? I know I said I was going to put in a review of the Packers-Vikings game, but can we sneak this in too? Danny Kelly, put this up on the Ringer. Just do something with it. That is
perfect stuff. Okay, so my issue with this movie is that it is a complete nothing, right? So, like, I think people, the people that don't like this movie, and there seems to be a split.
You didn't have a movie, you had a release date. That's what happened. Right. You didn't have a movie, you had a freaking release date.
Okay, so we absolutely agree there because it was very clear that they didn't have enough time in the editing process or dealing with this like really awkward Leia situation with Carrie Fisher. It was very clear that they could have just used a lot more time to make sure that worked. Reshoots would have been great. Some rewrites would have been great. And I just don't think they had enough time. And we see it at the beginning of the movie. So there's a huge disparity between the reader or the user reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and the critic reviews. And I know a lot of people are like critics, they overthink things or whatever. The user reviews have it like 80% or whatever. I just don't understand it. I couldn't stand it. So it's going to be compared to the prequel series because of it. But the prequel series is bad because it has like awful dialogue, terrible tone shifts, like unusually poor plot contrivances, unnecessary, complicated plot devices, bad pacing, bad acting, bad editing, right? They're not better than the Rise of Skywalker, but they had like better moments, right? Like, so Rise of Skywalker was a nothing. So this has like moments, right? Like the prequels have moments. I can forgive like a movie for not standing up to Duel of the Fates. That might be the best scene in all of Star Wars. And, if you want to say there's some in the original trilogy that are better, fine. But they had consistent flatness. Like the Rise of Skywalker had consistent flatness. The prequels, there's a couple of moments that I really liked, like Kenobi's battle with Grievous or pod racing, or like the betrayal scene on Mustafar where he finally like becomes Darth Vader and almost dies fighting Kenobi. The scene in the opera where Palpatine tells the story of Darth Plagueis, the final shot of the prequels where, the Empire is taking shape, the espionage and Geonosis. Count Dooku, I love Count Dooku. He's got his own unique fighting style, which like if you go deep into like the lightsaber lore or whatever, makes a ton of sense. But you don't have to. It just is very clearly obvious and different, and it matches like his dialogue and tone. That's all cool. And Rise of Skywalker had like none of this. There's not like a great moment, right? And I'm wondering like, why did I leave this film after I stopped being angry, also feeling like empty? And it's like another way to compare to the prequels. Again, the prequels suck. The prequels had like themes and meaning, like they conveyed it really poorly. And executed a lot of them really inelegantly, but at least like it had them, right? Like, that they were anti-war movies. You knew it was like a parable of Bush and Cheney. If you didn't know, George Lucas was like more than happy to just like tell you, right? Like, this is about Bush and Cheney. And he like lifted lines from like Bush's speeches and stuff, right? You knew it was like warning about like imperialism. You knew it was about like demythologizing the Jedi and underscoring how dangerous they are and how dumb they were. And you knew it was about like the twin threats of like stoicism and impulsiveness and testing the bonds of friendship and love and all of those things, right? The Jedi suck. Like they landed on a planet full of slaves, do nothing about it until one of them has like magic blood. And then they let him win his own freedom but like nobody else, right? Like, cool. Harry Potter finding out his dad was a dick was good for the books. Demythologizing the relics of history is, I think, usually good storytelling. Like it brings into life the real nature of the history of this universe. Like one of the things Star Wars was really good at in the original trilogy is making it seem like a used universe and having like a history full of flawed characters is like part of that. And even the first two movies of like this last trilogy has clear meanings, like embracing failure and shedding like predestination and having a sense of belonging and charting your own course, dealing with like betrayal, letting go of fear, stepping into the unknown, parenthood, heritage. Like those are all themes that like fit in the last two movies, but I don't think Rise of Skywalker like had a theme or a message or anything contemporary to link it to.
Do you think that has anything to do with the fact that they were able to have a singular director for the 6 movies prior, and meanwhile they played hot potato with the last 3 movies to the point where you can almost just sit there and be like, there's 3 movies happening right now, and it's clear
from each other, and like this one just clearly hates The Last Jedi, and like a lot of people hate The Last Jedi, I get it, but like the movie hates it, and so they tear down everything The Last Jedi did, which I understand The Last Jedi kind of like undercut a lot of what was being set up in The Force Awakens, so I kind of get why it feels kind of like but like the problem is this is the 3rd movie, right? The Last Jedi is
the crawl basically exists to say that this is what should have happened. This is what should have been set up at the end of the last movie. Like they might as well have just opened with that.
Yes. Yeah, the opening and the opening crawl like in all of these movies is like, oh, we've done a time skip, a lot's happened, and it like informs you of kind of what happens. But like the most enormous plot point, which we've already said spoiler, so I'll just say, did he just like tell you Emperor Palpatine is back? There's no sense of dread. There's no realization. We don't get reaction shots of the characters. We don't get to live in the moment of the universe where the universe finds out.
That's a movie in and of itself. Or that's like an hour of a movie to figure out.
Yeah.
Endgame showed that people would be willing to sit through 3+ hours of a movie if it was good. You had opportunity.
Right, yeah, it was just wild to me that they just dropped this giant plot bomb and they just work with like, now it's a fact of the universe and we don't get to absorb it. And that's like one of the problems of this movie is that you never get to absorb anything, especially in like the first third or the first half of the movie. It's salad. Like, scene, vignette. Like
the fact they were doing they were doing light speed jumping was a metaphor for the first hour or two or hour-ish of the movie of just boom, 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 boom. We're just not going to stop. We're going as fast as humanly possible. We have 7 pounds of shit that we're trying to fit in a 3-pound bag.
Right, yeah. So, like, if you've ever watched, like, the Clone Wars animated show, which I actually recommend, it gets really good. They do these episode recaps at the beginning where this guy is essentially doing propaganda for the Republic, where he just shouts, like, the setup. Like, instead of the opening crawl, it's just this guy shouting in war propaganda at you. And that's, like, what the first third of this movie was like, them just shouting episode recaps. That's what my brother called it, episode recaps for episodes that never happened. We're not like getting adventures. We're getting allusions to adventures. They're so fast paced. We don't have time to take them in. And the dialogue matches the freneticness of this first half of the movie. It's like punch, counter punch, set up punchline, set up punchline, set up punchline, callback. There's no time to breathe. There's no room to let people be people and adventures be adventures and characters grow or establish themselves. There's no room for anything to breathe. It's like not the product of structure. And it's like, there are other movies where you follow 3 distinct groups of people with like no problem. There's no reason to be harried. Like we're not going to forget that Rey is training with Leia if you spend more than 10 seconds on like the First Order spies subplot, right? Like, just like first let's figure out like what they're doing and what their goal is in this adventure. And then, like, do it. Like, I don't understand. Like, in the second movie of the original trilogy, in episode 5, right? Like, Luke is on Dagobah at the same time, like, Han and Leia are trying to figure out what's going to happen, at Cloud City, and they have to go to Cloud City, and they both escape from Hoth in different ways or whatever. And it's just 2 completely different, and it was fine, right? Because they were paced really well. And they interconnected at the end because they needed to. And this is just like scene. Even after they like connect together and they have to find like the Sith map or whatever. And they go to this planet that's having this festival, which is about as frenetic as the movie is at this point. It's exactly as fast paced, and it's like you feel like it's slowing down, and then it speeds up again, and not in a way that an action movie speeds up, but in a way where you can't absorb like any information, right? And so like partway through the movie, it gets like revealed, right? That like, that Rey is the granddaughter of Palpatine, which, James, you and I are going to talk about that in a second, because what the hell? But like, the Whiplash doesn't let you like think about anything. It's so hard to remember everything they're doing, and at least lets you forget, like, why the hell did Palpatine's son or whatever avoid this dark fate? Why is it so specific to Rey? Why is the movie about Rey and not Palpatine's son? What's
it's
so special
all about
her?
telling you things matter-of-factly, this is the way the world works, and not like, hey, this is a thing. It's, no, this is a thing, this has always been a thing, this has never not been a thing, we're moving on.
Right, yeah, exactly. And like, okay, let's talk about this Palpatine thing. First, like, why? Like, there's no reason to. And like, holy crap. So one of the things that The Last Jedi did really well, and I understand it did a lot of things poorly, and I'm not going to disagree with that, but one of the things it did really well is it removed the mystical force, this magical thing that permeates all beings throughout the universe, from like this dynastic bloodline rule that you can find with like DNA tests and like breed Jedi, and now there's like force animals in your blood or whatever. And like, I understand, like, the longer we're in the Star Wars universe, the closer we get to like your mom is a Jedi and now so are you, instead of like what seemed like the original meaning where the Force plucks users seemingly at random, like the kid shoveling camel poop at Canto Bight, right? But we had to do like a hard course correct and make it like a goddamn genetic trait. So all we do is like Punnett squares to figure out how many Jedi we're going to make. And like, I get like the original trilogy sets this up in Empire Strikes Back. It's a bombshell there. And in Return of the Jedi, it provides, it deepened it because of the twist with Leia. This provided personal stakes for Luke. So like, I understand. I don't think the Leia part was executed super great, but fine, whatever. Every additional entry into the canon reinforces this like dumb view of the Jedi that feels completely out of place in the way the Jedi are set up in the universe. Cause it's like, it's not even that hard to say that's not generally true, but it's true for the Skywalker line because Anakin's father is literally the Force. So that kind of just changes things. So you can have it so the Skywalkers produce Jedi for a while, but everyone else, it's random. But now it's like always dynastic. And it's like, if you're a Jedi, like somebody in your past is a Jedi. And it's like, what the hell happened? Like, why do we not have like these hereditary Jedi kings or whatever? Like, that sucks, right? And like, there's nothing that connects Rey to Palpatine at all. Whereas the thing that connected like Luke and Vader was that Vader was set up as a huge villain. Luke was already set up for a confrontation with them. They already have it. And Vader is this imposing figure, and he's the big bad, although not like the big bad. And there's a connection, right? And Vader is like holding Luke's friends hostage, right? Like they start developing these like personal tensions. Luke fights Vader, and then Vader reveals it, and you're like, oh, holy crap. Whereas, like, we just kind of, like, find out in the middle of the third movie that it's, like, the case, but, like, there's nothing that connects them. There's no personal... like, it's just, like, there's nothing inherent in the Palpatine story or in the Rey story that connects the two. Vader killed Luke's father. Wait, that's a metaphor. Like, that's different. This one is just like, yeah, you remember your parents when we said they were nothing? By that we mean they chose to be nothing. We totally meant that thing that we said.
They sold you so you would have freedom.
Right. Like, what is just like ridiculous. I have so many problems. I've been going. Keep your turn.
Let me start for just a moment. I got told to stop yelling profanity at the screen. At one point, I may have yelled out, and here's your cursing warning. Oh, what in the cinnamon toast fuck ever? Like, and I think that was when that may or may not have been when the X-Wing was brought up and she was able to get in it and it just started. Like, I may. And this wasn't a packed theater by any means, but I may have said a few things in public that I should be ashamed of. But as the movie kept going, I went in with an open mind. I knew that some people really didn't like it. And I thought it was going to be one of those things where I actually did like it because at the time, I did like the second new movie. I did like The Last Jedi. I liked how it ended. I thought it was cool. I thought it was interesting. I thought that this was a good twist, despite the fact that the majority of the movie are always in peril. Fine, whatever. But at the time, I actually kind of liked it. Now, I really don't like the second movie because because everything that I saw from the third movie just proved why everybody was right about their opinions of the second one. I guess my bigger problems with the movie were how it just flew in the face of the prior canon of the other movies. Like, if you're gonna say in one of the prequels that, you know, there is a way to cheat death to bring somebody who dies back to life, but it is only a Sith power, and then you do it as like being part of the light, like, what are you doing? Like, you cannot retcon this. This is important. All of a sudden you have Jesus-style healing powers? Do you know what Luke Skywalker would have killed to do other than, wiping his butt with a cold metal hand? Having an actual hand! This would have been wonderful. He would have had the ability to actually grow back his hand. All of a sudden you have this. Part of my problem with the newer 3 movies is just how, lurched forward they were, because between the prequels and the regular series, there wasn't that huge a change in the abilities and powers. But in the newer movies, it just moved forward so quickly. It was never established. Kylo Ren had never used the healing power, presumably, had never used the healing power, version of things. And then it was put onto him by Rey, who apparently has mastered it, or at least, practiced with serpents, which is a fun name for a band, by the way. All of a sudden she's really good at it, and you would think that a skill of this sort of importance would take, time and energy to work. All of a sudden Kylo Ren is a frickin' expert at it, and he uses all of his life force to bring Rey back from the dead. Yay, zombies. Also, they kiss and he's dead now. What?
Oh my god, I can't believe that. The fact that the two of them kissed without okay, I understand, you can interpret a lot of their scenes in the second movie as having sexual tension. I kind of didn't, but I get where you might. But that's not enough for the first time they are this close to each other since the fight scene in the second movie, that they just make out that was totally out of place.
And why should you care? Why should you care about Ben Solo anyway? Ben Solo was on the screen in this movie for a couple of minutes.
I have thoughts about this.
Nothing. His death meant absolutely nothing. Him being yeeted out of existence would have been a much finer way. Oh my god, that's something. Right.
So Rise of Skywalker does not have character arcs, which is just mind-boggling to me. I mean, the prequels, they had clear character arcs, and the first movie didn't even have a main character. That's absurd. Obviously there's the Anakin arcs, but there's Kenobi's reluctant acceptance of his role as a teacher and his ultimate failure with that. His arc in the first episode is someone content to let events lead him before he's forced to take control, which is kind of weak. I get it. We see Padme grow and change as a character from somebody who is naive about the world, and she grows into this worldly leader. She's always bold, but she doesn't know what that means. She even goes through the hero's journey herself of resisting the call, embracing it, then being forced into a quest and building allies and all that. And the characters, they mostly suck, but they have them, and there are attempts here in the prequels, throughout the prequels, and I just don't think Rise of Skywalker has them. And in the previous 2 movies, it's very clear what the character arcs are. Rey has to confront her fear of leaving home, even after she's left home. She has to stop believing the lie that her parents are coming back. She has to establish her sense of belonging and her place in the world. She has to overcome her debilitating attachment to a home that never was. She now needs to learn to be a Jedi and learn to accept that heroism is self-made and not deterministic. She has to stop finding a way to matter for cosmic reasons and start mattering for reasons that she drives forward. Finn, he's got his own character arcs. He has to embrace personhood. In the second movie, and this is even foreshadowed in the first movie, he has to overcome fear and cowardice. Luke goes through 2 character arcs despite only being in 1 movie. He's overcome with fear that he'll train the next Darth Vader, and that fear actually sparks that thing into happening. He's tempted to give in. He pulls back at the last second, but not before it's too late. And Ben Solo, who's going through all of his own character arcs, reacts to what he sees. And Luke has always had to deal with his own aggressiveness and impulsiveness. And though he overcame his, in the original trilogy, he didn't wipe his personality clear. His struggles in the second movie are very related to his overall personality issues. And his second arc asks the question of whether or not he's capable of going out into the universe and being a force for change, and his fears holding him back, and he's mired in this misery, and he's embracing how miserable it is to be a hermit. And he's he confuses the poor teachings of the Jedi from the Old Republic with the concept of just having force capable warriors for good, being an aegis for change. And once he learns that there's a distinction between the old philosophy of the Jedi and just the general concept of people who have the force being good, he learns that he can enter the larger world, and he's hunted by failure and lets go of it. And that's one of the clear themes of the second movie, failure, right? And they tie the theme to the character arc. So even side character like Poe Dameron, who I don't really think has a character arc in A Force Awakens, has a character arc here, and he has to go through this arc where he's also impulsive and he's short-sighted, and he's an inability to consider anything other than his immediate surroundings or trust the judgment of others. And even though the Canto Bight scene was poorly plotted out and it kind of sucked, one criticism I don't really believe is that it was intentional. Was that it was pointless, because it's intentionally pointless. He needed failure to grow as a character, and Finn needed to go to Canto Bight to take action to prove that he could be, brave and courageous in the right circumstances. And also, Rose was there, I guess. But we see motifs about the nature of war with war profiteers, and there's a morally ambiguous rogue, but this time he doesn't have a heart of gold. He's not Han Solo. Not everybody who's a thief is Han Solo. That's cool, but what character arcs do we see in Rise of Skywalker? What about Rey's character is flawed in a way that changes by the end of the movie? Does she have an anger problem that makes it believable that she's going to strike down the Emperor in hatred? Did you for 1 second believe that she could be angry enough to strike down Emperor Palpatine? Because I thought Luke could give in to his anger and strike down Palpatine in episode 6, but I for 1 second never believed that she would strike down Palpatine in anger. That doesn't make...
It turns into the Game of Thrones thing at that point. And I realize you didn't watch much of Game of Thrones, but part of the reason why anybody, and the last season of Game of Thrones is atrocious, admittedly, but the reason why Dany was such a wonderful character until the last episode was that there was this teeter-totter where you're I don't know if she's going to be her father. Oh, she's clearly she's clearly the liberator or whatever. Yeah, but she's liberating through, crucifying these people. There was an evil balance there that she had to keep kind of in check, and it kept the viewer watching, as opposed to this where you're just what is her motivate? What is she doing?
Right. So it feels like it was just thrown in there because it's the concept, the ring theory or whatever, where it's they want the trilogy to rhyme, right? But her character development doesn't echo Luke's, right? She's constantly attempting to save rather than kill Kylo. She starts with that, right? Which is not what Luke wanted to kill Vader, right? Even after he learned that Vader was his father. I don't know, why we believe that she would, kill the Emperor in hatred. Because she accidentally struck down Chewie because she used Force lightning. You already established that, Force powers aren't necessarily, related to, how evil you are. So, she used Force lightning while another Force used, that, screw that, right? That's pretty weak. And it was also, I just think it was, a really stupid plot point, but fine, whatever.
If you're gonna kill Chewie, you can kill Chewie. It's gonna hurt.
Let's kill him. It's just this false, it feels like the worst parts of comic books being empty in their stories, right? Is that the characters come back from the dead. And it's I love his character to have resonance, or to the things that happen to have resonance, they have to have some level of permanence, and they don't. But the closest thing we have to a character flaw in this movie for her is her just kind of dipping out in the middle of missions, which honestly, that's a pretty Jedi thing to do. They just kind of do it all the time. especially in like the extended canon and stuff like that. But it also turns out like that's pretty critical to like winning the war. Like she needed to dip out to get to Palpatine's hideout anyway, right? So like that's not a character flaw. So we know Luke has an anger problem because he had to fight an anger hallucination of himself in the anger cave, right? Like, it's very obvious, right? Like, that, like, it's very clear he has to overcome that, right? How does Finn grow? How does Poe grow? Like, because Poe was afraid of asking for help when, in the last movie, I guess, and then no one showed up, and now two people told him he needed to ask for help again, Lando and this new side chick. And so he did, and then they showed up. Like, that's not like growth. That's like weird. There's like ways to even make this happen, right? So like Rey has struggled with her sense of belonging, with attachment to family, with the betrayal of her parents, with the concept of destiny, and Palpatine could have like used it. Like, why even retcon the previous movie and make Palpatine her grandfather if they don't like use it? Like, he mentions it, right? Kind of like in the final scene, but mostly he just like tells her to strike him down like he did to Luke. Like, we don't have Luke's history of anger. Like, Luke is rejecting the lessons of his masters who tell him not to give in to hate. But like Rey, that's not an issue, right? Like, if Palpatine was like, this is your destiny, you know, your bloodlines determine who you are, you've always wanted to fit in somewhere, this is where you fit, like, created the things that she desired the most in the world, and she has to reject those anyway for her friends or whatever. Like, that's a much better character arc, and they gave themselves the tools to do it, and they didn't even do it. Like, the only person who has a character arc is like Kylo, and like you said, he's got like 3 minutes of screen time. Like, that's not a main character.
Or they end up introducing an idea as a throwaway line that ends up turning into a gigantic thing. Like, they did that multiple times, and we've done the whole we've done a discussion before, or we've mentioned the whole like the South Park style of writing, where it's therefore and but. Where some stories are like, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, giving an idea of like a linear story, as opposed to the people who write South Park, where it's like, this happened, therefore this happened, but then this happened. So the idea is to go in and replace your ands with buts and therefores to make it more interesting. Like, there was so many moments in this that seems so incredibly linear. Don't get me wrong, it is a tour de force of visuals. There's so much going on. I almost wanted to tell you that we need to wait until next week to review the movie, just so I could watch it a second time, so I could figure out what the hell I missed. When I was leaving, like as the movie was going on, I was in a movie theater that you can drink beer. So I ordered a Guinness to start, sat down, and I finished the Guinness somewhere around like a half hour, 45 minutes in. And then as the movie continued, I noticed that I was slowly but surely crushing my can. And it's sort of like the people who like have TMJ, and they all of a sudden they like wake up in the morning like, why does my jaw hurt so bad? Oh, because I was grinding my teeth throughout the night. I must have been pissed. Like, I noticed that I was slowly but surely crunching my can down into nothing. And then as the last like 45 minutes hit, I was folding it. Like, I'd crushed it down like you'd stomped it down, and then I was trying to fold the pieces. And as I was leaving, I was like, why do I have dried blood on my hand? Oh, because because I was folding an aluminum can that clearly should not have been. Oh, so that's a fun that's a fun thing to discover. There were so many moments where you just sat and went, what are you doing? Like the whole thing for me, the theme for me over the last 3 movies is that there were a lot of interesting ideas, and with very few exceptions, they weren't really fleshed out. Especially the last movie, which seemed like a series of adventures, like one of the Star Wars novels, like an anthology of tales of like a couple of ideas that you could have done, that they weren't fleshed out very well, but they were kind of interesting, and they just decided to go with it. And so you wonder after a while, like, wow, that could have been way more interesting. Wow, you really committed to that situation, didn't you? Like, so you managed to fit, thousands of, you managed to fit thousands of starships through the same pinhole style, like, trying to get through the maze that Rey, gave you the path to do. Like, really?
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I have so many problems with that. Like,
the real Star Wars was the friends we made along the way.
So, like, I'm not huge into, like, nitpicks about, like, the facts or the details of a particular movie, because you can nitpick any movie and you can just make every movie seem bad, because there's, like, an internal logic that doesn't work out or whatever, and it's difficult to create a lore spanning thousands of years that doesn't contradict. And so long as the movie's message, I think, gets across coherently, I think that there's kind of some room for wiggle room. But, like, if you think immediately in the theater without attempting to look for nitpicks, I think that's pretty bad. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, how many people are on a Star Destroyer? Like 1,000, 10,000? I have no idea. But how many Star Destroyers do they have? 300? I want to think they have 10,000 because the guy said this will increase our force 10,000 fold, right? So, let's say there's 10,000 Star Destroyers. That's like 1 million to 1 billion people, right? That are like staffing these Star Destroyers. And like, I have a hard time believing that they all kept this secret. Like, and like the people like shipping in material, like they didn't find all this stuff natively on the Sith planet, right?
Well, that was the thing about this, the prequels, or not even the prequels, but that was the thing about the regular movies, was that the Empire was having to, like, the Empire presumably financed the creation of the first one with the assistance of the guilds, which, God, there's a sentence. And then, in Return of the Jedi, they were clearly contracting out, and they were struggling to get all this stuff together. Meanwhile, you're telling me for the last 20-ish years that you were able to build all of these weapons, all of these things. Meanwhile, you were also having him pull the Emperor pull the strings and help put together Starkiller Base, which is clearly going to be using some of these resources. Resources are not an infinite thing in the Star Wars universe, nor are they in any other. What are you doing?
Right? If you have the ability to make 10,000 Death Stars, which, by the way, stop making more Death Stars. Like, the plot of this movie was essentially the worst version of the Dark Empire plot from the comics, where there they have a galaxy gun, which is basically a Death Star, but you can shoot it from anywhere, which is basically what the Starkiller Base is, right? But now, like, every Star Destroyer is a Death Star. Like, yeah, stop it. Like, you can create stakes.
Where do you go from here, then? Like, what is your next thing? You gonna put them on TIE fighters?
Right. Just, like, reset. Just, like, explain that, like, a fleet is more dangerous than a Death Star because a Death Star can only be used to intimidate. You can't use it to, like, win battles or take over space or control large amounts of territory, which with the fleet you can. So the fleet is larger stakes, and you don't need to make it blow up planets to do that. Just explain, right, that, like, this thing is a threat without harkening back to all the other threats / the one threat that you know how to do once. Like, the prequels never had a Death Star until they alluded to it at the end, but they never, like, had or used a Death Star, right? Again, prequels suck. But no one can accuse the prequels of not having a sense of stakes, right? Like, right. The fate of the galaxy was at stake, and no one had a giant gun. Like, you don't need to, like, stop doing it. And you could just make a movie where people have personal investment in the outcome, and no one does, right? And this goes back to the character arc thing, right? Like, Kylo might be the only one with the character arc. He has like 4 minutes of screen time, and I'm not even like confident why he changes, because it's not the stakes of the movie. It's not anything that like resolves itself.
The
like,
ghost of his father that came into being because of his mother decided to pass all of her life force onto her dead father or something. Maybe it was a hallucination due to the healing that he did. But
what does he see differently about the world, right? He goes from evil to good, right? And we're pretty confident it occurs when Rey heals him, and then he also sees his father's hallucination, right? But like, is it because he fell in love with Rey? Is it just because he saw his dead father again? Because that's happened a lot. in like his dreams and stuff.
This
and
might
like,
as well have been called Ghostbusters 3, considering how many goddamn ghosts were in this frickin' movie.
Right, like including the zombie Palpatine, right?
Yes!
But there's like nothing that like pulls him. First of all, I don't think there's actually that much tension between like Ren and Rey in the first two movies, because he's just trying to turn her to evil. That's kind of it. There's not like a pull in this movie that like makes him good. Rey saves his life, Han Solo appears, and now he's good, maybe. But again, that's the closest thing we have to a character arc, and if it's the emotional core of the movie, if it's how a character learns and grows and changes, he needs more screen time because he's not the protagonist. And it's like weird when the character with like the fourth most screen time is the closest thing you have to somebody who grows. And like, why does he paste his mask back together? What does that signify? Like in the previous movie, he ditches the mask because it's the only reason he wears it, he realizes, is to emulate Vader. And, you know, he can't do that. He can only be himself. And destroying the mask in like a fit of rage is an indication that he can be his own person, independent of someone who lives in the shadow of his grandfather. And if you're super into reading into like these kinds of metaphors in the movie, it's also like kind of a metaphor for like how the movies can be independent of the trilogy too. But you don't have to go that far. But like he just like puts it back together in this movie. I don't know why, because masks are cool looking. But like, you know, it represents him and the trilogy becoming their own thing, and then it doesn't. Like, come on.
No, but when you end up in that situation too, you're sitting like, what signifies anything? And then as you're starting to like sit at a plot and be like, okay, this is actually I can sort of see where they're going with it. Then you end up with something incredibly not fleshed out at all, where it's the spy plot that they almost hilariously just end. Like, oh, okay, well, this is something we don't have to worry about anymore. He's dead now.
Yeah.
He was a main character in the first two movies. He's also dead.
Right. And like the only thing where I was like, that motivation makes sense was when he was like, I don't really care if you win. I just want him to lose. And I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. But like, that's it. Like, it's like the only thing
you realize the stakes you're messing with, and that like, do you just like live in petty? Like, is that your thing, or do you have more to you? Like, I feel,
right, and like, yeah, okay, and like, yeah, maybe that's set up in the other movies. Maybe I'll give you that one a pass. But like, it just like feels so like empty, right? And you don't have to explain like every single character. That's one of the things that I was kind of annoyed with in terms of criticism of The Last Jedi. Like, you don't have to explain where like Snoke comes from and all that, because they didn't explain where Palpatine came from until like the prequels, and he was just fine as a villain. But like, it does feel weird that like we went from General Hux being the sole military mind for the past two movies to like the Council of Moffs, or the governors, that we've got a bunch of generals now. Like, that, it's not impossible for like that to happen or anything like that, but it was like kind of weird. And they have like more authority than him or whatever. And it just like felt like out of place. Like, wouldn't it have been more interesting if they were still the two primary leaders in the First Order and they were just politicking at each other while one of them is struggling with whether or not he's evil or good, and the other one doesn't actually care about the First Order. He just wants that guy to lose. Like, that's way more cool than like the generals came together and were like, that guy's the rat. Like, I don't know. Okay, so at the end of the day, Rise of Skywalker is probably not worse than the prequels. But that's like saying the Bears are not worse than the Bucks. Like, okay, maybe the Bears are better, and over like 100 games they would win more matchups, right? But like the Bucks have their moments. It's easier to attach yourself to those moments, right? They're more fun to cheer for and watch. You know, like this, like at this level of quality, right? Where like nobody's good. You'd rather have the quarterback that throws as many touchdowns as he does interceptions, right? Because at least it's like a lot of touchdowns, right? Like, I would rather have, you know, Anakin complaining about sand and attaching that to like romance somehow. Like, your skin is soft, not like sand, which sucks and is coarse. And I hate the desert because that's where I'm from, where I was a slave. But if that also meant that I got the Duel of the Fates, amazing, right? Like, but like Rise of Skywalker is just like, yeah, I mean, whatever. A bunch of stuff happens. Don't worry about it. And so I'm going to link one review of the movies that I cribbed a little bit from, but it's mostly kind of entirely different because it kind of explores the meta story behind why these movies were created. Quentin Reviews is a YouTube channel I watch, but he does say it pretty well. And he's talking about the final scene on Tatooine, which doesn't like super have a point. I did appreciate the final shot, but like it doesn't make a ton of sense.
It made more sense than the random appearances
yes.
of the moon of Endor or Cloud City or a couple of other random locations. Which, I mean, I get that that's it existed, but really,
right. So Quentin Reviews says, if that's what you want out of the Star Wars movie, just for like the main character to go back to a set that you recognize from a previous movie and to not really find a point to being there outside of the presumption that you, the audience, recognize the set and find some attachment to it, then you're going to love this movie. That's the litmus test. If you just want to see Star Wars characters doing Star Wars stuff, yeah, okay, fine. It's a fine movie. I don't know why you would dislike the previous movies, but like this one, which seems to be the case for a lot of people who like this movie. But if you just want to see Star Wars people do Star Wars stuff in like spaceships with lasers, I don't really like, I'm not super judging you. I'm judging you a little bit. I get it. But like the thing that separates like the original trilogy and the reason that Star Wars is such like an enduring legacy, and the reason that we can remember some of our favorite shows from our childhood and not some of our other favorite shows from our childhood is because you attach yourselves to and remember like characters and themes and like messages and things that have resonance. And you may not realize it when you're watching it at the time, but like if you are asked to describe the plot of the original trilogy 10 years from now, if you're asked to describe the plot of the original trilogy, you would do it a lot better than you would be able to describe the plot of the prequels, right? Obviously. And I think that you'll be able to do it way better than you'll do the plot of the final trilogy and especially the last movie. Like, I think you just have to watch the original trilogy once. And I know this is not like a fair test because most of you listening to this have probably watched it a ton. But like, if you watch the original trilogy once and you watch this trilogy once, and especially the last movie, you'll be able to explain the plot and the characters and the motivations and everything. Be able to explain the original trilogy much more 10 years from now than you will this stuff. And so like, yeah, you can have fun at the movie, but that's not what I liked about I can find a space adventure anywhere, man. Like, yeah, come on.
We do need to wrap this up here in the next few minutes, but because I feel like if we go longer about Star Wars than the football game, then people might actually be a little upset about it. But yeah, this is a refinized group therapy session on this, so feel free to comment and whatever you need to do here. But the movie didn't do things well. Which is an odd thing to say. I'm not a filmmaker, but I do know that you can kill people. You can have people die, or you can, if you actually like introduce a location, you can kill that, and it doesn't end up destroying the movie. Poe's not a girlfriend surviving and helping fight on the planet when her fighting the Death Star. Star Destroyers?
That's Star Destroyers?
Yeah. Like, her existing there was baffling. Like, no, you could have just killed her and the little guy off and it would have been sad, but that was the point of why you did it. Even
it provides the stakes.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're sad when Alderaan blows up just because Leia's from Alderaan. We don't even know anyone on it.
No.
Right? Leia's from Alderaan. It blows up. Everyone's sad and establishes how evil the Empire is.
Even C-3PO was safe from it, and it was sad that he lost his memory. You could have gone the rest of the movie without doing anything with him, and I would have been fine. If he would have died on that planet, giving his life to, providing the information for the Sith thing, great. It would have been sad, but it would have worked. Chewie dying in the explosion where Rey discovers her true powers. It would have been sad, but it would have been fine. It felt like you were doing more service to the fans than you were to actually like telling a story. And by the end of it,
right, and that's what this entire movie feels like. It feels just like, here's what fans wanted. Here's what they wanted fixed from the last movie.
Oh, so you didn't like that romance? Let's keep them a million miles away.
Right. Also, not that, like you said, we got to wrap this up, but like, that's like a plot thread that just never gets wrapped. Like, what about Finn? Like, that's like a major
Finn's thing. Like, he wanted to tell her, and it never got brought up again.
Yeah, and it's through all three movies. It's not even like it appeared in this movie. Like, do you have a boyfriend? Like, he asks that the first time he meets her. Like, he's clearly attracted to her. And it happens through all three movies, and it's just like,
apparently, J.J. Abrams has said something along the lines of, in that scene, he was going to say that he wanted to tell her that he's force sensitive.
Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah, bullshit.
That's the thing you say when you're drowning in quicksand. Hey, I never told you. I never told you I can lift rocks. I can lift tiny rocks with my fingers without actually lifting them up. No.
What's the thing you were going to tell her? What do you mean? Oh, back when we were at quicksand. Oh, I'm not going to tell you.
I was going to tell her I lift little rocks.
Yeah, that's you're force sensitive. That's the embarrassing thing you wouldn't tell Poe Dameron. Okay, dude. That's what people are sensitive about in this universe. Whether or not they're force sensitive. Come on.
He's sensitive, all right. To be sure.
Right. Okay, yeah. This movie was like a bunch of people wanted to see this, so they saw it, and they didn't really think about how to connect it together. And it was very clear, and they obviously needed like another year of just post-production and editing to make it more coherent. And that didn't happen, so we just get a bunch of scenes pasted together that follow the semblance of a plot, and it's awful, and I hate it.
I have never left a theater more upset. And I walked in expecting to like it. And I left, again, bleeding, which was an odd sensation. I've never left a movie theater bleeding before. But like it was so weird. And one last point, and I promise I will be done. The reason,
no promises about Arif.
Yeah, no promises about Arif. But the reason why The Mandalorian show works for me is because occasionally they may go to a new planet, or to a planet we've already been to. And it is fun. It doesn't feel like it's nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. It seems like it is being done because there's a purpose for being there. And the
characters have like clear motivations and relationships.
Yeah.
And they move for reasons that you understand at a pace that allows you to absorb it. It's just, I don't know, The Mandalorian's really good for all the reasons that this wasn't.
Yeah. And so when you find yourself in this movie, you know, it wasn't that at all. It felt far more shoehorned. It felt far more nostalgia based. And it felt far more unnecessary. One of the things that excited people about the idea of the new movies was, hey, we're going to have all of these new characters. And that's great. But then you end up, in the situation of, well, we have to find a way of shoehorning all of these old characters in it. We have to find some way of paying homage to this. And you just sit there, and by the end of it, did Billy D really need to make an appearance in this? Probably not. I still don't know if he is I don't know if he's the father of the fighter that was put on there, or
right.
if he's just gonna help her with some 23andMe thing across the universe. And that was the thing. And admittedly, I listened to a podcast on the Ringer today, which I try not to do, whether it be not because I don't like the Ringer, but just because I don't want something to kind of flavor my opinion on it. Because if I listen to a podcast's opinion on it, whether it be Viking stuff or if I listen to like an entertainment thing, it tends to color my opinion a bit. But one of the points that the Ringers, I believe the Watchables, brought up today was that it seemed like this is the only movie that they were pitching series like series out of that would appear on your Disney Plus after the movie comes out. Be like, oh, hey, you know, it'd be a great idea would be Billy D and this woman going through the universe. You better remember her because she might come up. Wink, wink. Like, and it was just so. Oh, you can't jam their speeders because they're not speeders, and all these animals are going across the
Also, like, when have they jammed speeders before in this universe? Like,
never,
is that been a thing?
Never once.
like a contrived way to put a bunch of horses on a ship, I guess.
I'm gonna start screaming like Maddie Matheson by the end of this. I'm just. I left so, and my wife who wanted to see it, she you know, Star Wars fan, we left and all she could do was question how people were or were not related because it wasn't clear in the movie, or how the two people, or how when Kylo and Rey were in front of the Emperor or zombie Emperor or whatever, how all of a sudden they were able to use, you know, this ancient Sith thing that was a throwaway line in the movie, and all of a sudden he becomes more powerful than anything ever existing, and he can just shoot lightning and take down, you know, ships through that. Just like none of this was explained. This was all. How
crazy is it that every movie ends with Emperor Palpatine electrocuting himself? Like, come on. Come on.
I'm going to just start hitting my head against the microphone at this point. I'm just going to rest it there because I lack the strength to go on. I have been beaten by this movie. And you know what the BS thing is, really? I'm probably going to see it once more in the theater. I'm not going to take notes. But I'm going to probably see it once more in the theater and try to sit through it. And maybe a month and a half from now, when I see it in the theater again, and and if I get to the point of I need to get up and leave, I won't feel as bad. But I think I need to see this one more time just to see if I'm missing something. Like I want there to be something positive out of it. But really, all I feel when I think of this movie is just confusion and anger. My wife had a million questions for me after the movie, and I kept just like forming my hand into a fist. It was just like, I can't talk. It's like when you leave, when you like leave like a party with your wife and you like make it to the car. You're like, I'm not saying anything. You close the doors of the car. You're like, oh my God, did you see their house? Their house was atrocious. Did you like, everything was terrible about what just happened. That dinner party was terrible. You see her hair? That was like, it felt like I was trying to keep a secret from the theater. Like I made it back into the car and went, okay, now I can speak terribly about the movie. That frickin' sucked. Like,
God.
All right. So that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code, which managed to go 2 hours, despite the fact that I was thinking this was going to be like an hour 15, maybe. So thank you for listening. Arif, what do you have to plug?
At some point, I'll be writing a recap of the Packers game over at The Athletic. I suspect it will take me a while.
Well, because you're still writing Star Wars reviews for Ain't It Cool News.
Right. But yeah, there's that. I'll be doing a mailbag as well over at The Athletic. So head over there, send in any questions we didn't answer, which presumably are a lot, and I'll hope to answer them there.
Sounds good. Well, that'll be it for this episode of Norse Code. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you stuck out this long, kudos. I don't know if you will still see the movie or if you will now go on Twitter and attempt to take Arif on in an argument, but I can tell you that clearly he has the downtime to write 20,000 words on this. So if you really want to take him on, your funeral. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that revenge is a dish best served funky as hell. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at Norse Code DN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.